I think I need a new sign. Blessings, everybody. This is Allison from Cat Creations. How are you? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, a connect, an epiphany, a mind explosion, a new book to read, a new author to explore, artwork to create, please consider supporting my work. All the links are at the bottom of the description. AlleyCatCreations211.com is where you could see. I didn't upload this one yet, but the paint and sip paintings that I do, skulls and hearts and pyramids, lots of pyramids and pencil drawings and all the like. If you're interested in anything, please email me. That's the best way you can get in contact with me if you'd like anything that you see and you want to buy it. 3D memberships, it's just one tier. That's all I have on this channel. Is a really nice way to support the channel and myself. And a way of saying thank you. You guys get channel member only content videos where I post once a week an oracle card reading, a very in-depth one. So I'm tapping into the collective of members to see where the healing needs to go. And I also do once a month giveaways. They're raffles. So I usually have 3 winners for those, and channel members get free entries. So some of my stuff is worth over $150, $200. Can't put a price on healing and fun decor in your house. But yeah, check out the memberships. And thank you to all the channel members that have contributed to helping me out and supporting. Today we're going to read the Inner Radiance, Chapter 9, Transmigration. Sorry, Transmigration. Don't know why the other term was in my brain. This is going to be part 1. Before I get into it, I just want to apologize to everybody. These are being a little delayed in putting it up. For those of you that are not on my lives and don't watch those, you're only watching my books. I had a catastrophic flood about 3 weeks ago due to tree roots in my pipes. And then a week later, I thought everything was fine. And then here we go again. There's a major block between my house and outside. So I had plumbers come and clear that out after a traumatic Noah's Ark event that happened in the house. After that, doesn't end there. The guys had to shut my main water off. I have a main inside my house, shut it off. And when they turned it back on, I guess the gasket or whatever have you wasn't caught all the way. And 2 to 3 days worth of water leaks behind my walls in my room, my bedroom, and my laundry room, creating a lot of mold and a lot of issues. I fixed it by myself. I got it to stay open and not drip. Possibly spirit helped out in that regard, but I'm still in the cleanup and demolding and just trying to pull water up out of the carpet every day and do some treatments to it so it doesn't get gross. So it's been an insanity of calling insurances and calling people back. And so I have not got my schedule going consistent because things have been crazy. So I do apologize. I am thankfully I am able to do a laundry right now, but my outside pipes need to be replaced. I can't afford even to do anything with life right now. I got, beautiful blessings from angels. So I'm doing what I can with what they're contributing to me, and it's not much, but it's getting me by each day. Coffee is a must at this point in time. I gotta enlarge this. So this is part one, the doctrine. Quote, according to the Egyptians, at the end of 3,000 years, sometime more or sometimes less, after endless transmigrations, all these atoms of the mummy are once more drawn together and are made to form the new outer clothing or body of the same monad, the real soul, which they had already clothed 2 or 3,000 years before. Life is ever present in the atom of matter, whether organic or inorganic. When life energy is active in the atom is organic. When dormant or latent, the atom is inorganic. 5 years of Theosophy, Blavatsky. Quote, thou takest away their breath, they die and return to their dust. Thou sendest forth thy spirit, they are created, and thou renewest the face of the earth. End quote, Psalms. Many of the processes of evolution in nature are very slow in their outworking and often cover vast ages, not only in the laying down of geographical strata, but also the progressive adaptation and unfoldment of life forces and forms to outer conditions. The slowness of evolution is due both to the density of the materials in which the life forces must manifest and to the fineness of the forces and vibrations working upon those materials to fashion them into more advanced forms of expression. When left to the slow progress of mass evolution alone, the process of man's evolution, unfoldment, and spiritualization is almost as slow as the laying down of the sedimentary rocks and their subsequent upheaval during vast geological ages. But we know that ultimately those seemingly unalterable rocks are uplifted out of the darkness of the ocean depths into the light of day, out of the mud and slime of the quagmire into the purifying light of the sun, out of the dense and rigid conditions of their materialization into the region of freedom in the air. Thus, what was once the bed of the ocean may now form mountain peaks, which seem to touch heaven and are crowned with a mantle of eternal snow, which bear aloft many forms of vegetable life, flowers, shrubs, and trees, and also many forms of bird and animal life. Following the same law of eternal change and progress, just so will the forces of spiritual evolution ultimately raise the mass of mankind up out of the dark waters of ignorance into the light of understanding, up out of the quagmires of sin and disease into the sweet, fresh air of health and happiness, up out of the dense and hampering conditions of materialistic thoughts and conceptions into the bright illumination of the spiritual sun, and ultimately into freedom of divine realization. Through the light and warmth of the spiritual sun, shining within man as the I am consciousness, he will be able to see and realize the light of the divine illumination and the warmth of divine love, and realize that he is indeed a son of God. So will man be raised up in the spiritual unfoldment until he, too, touches the sky of heavenly consciousness and is crowned with the clear white mantle of eternal purity. Thus will he lift up with him the countless millions of cells and atoms and other lower forms of life, which are part of his outer personality. I'm kind of speechless because this is like amazing. I don't know about you guys, but this is the picture. This is the hope of mankind. This is the eternal promise of the Father. This is the law. But since the mass evolution of mankind is almost as slow as the geological evolution of the planet, Are we content to wait for that slow, even if inevitable process, which requires ages of incarnations and the countless buffetings of karmic conditions for the fashioning of perfecting process? Or shall we not realize our own power here and now consciously to correlate with the streams of divine life and love and consciousness so freely poured out of us? By such correlation, we shall grow as a flower grows, pushing up our tender sprout of divine realization above the limiting physical conditions until we put forth the blossom of I am consciousness and the fruit of immortality. This is our goal. This is our destiny. It is for us as atoms of God to transmigrate through all these lower conditions so rapidly as possible, but now willingly and unresistingly follow the light of the spiritual sun and draw by the law of spiritual affinity into the bosom of the Father to be one with him here and now and forever. Pause. If they only knew, wait, let's do some math because I don't math in my brain. That gets messed up. Okay. And I'm just speculating when this book was actually written in the time frame, but let's just say 1915. It's 110 years since this book potentially was written. I know I have the copyright somewhere, but let's just say in the era of time that they were in and that they did most of their works, 110 years it's taken us to get to the stage of where they're writing this from in the now moment. Holy banana nuts. 110 years. That's insanity. How it's taken us this long. But mind you, if we look at our history, spiritually speaking, it's been delayed. It's been pushed off because the stuff that I'm talking about, even to up to this day, is still woo-woo into millions of minds. Though it is now becoming more readily acceptable to at least give it a listen. Because people are still not willing to make changes in their paradigm because they're used to their paradigm and they don't want to shift. And I get it because many of us are being shifted, but we weren't stuck in a paradigm per se. We're evolving. And many of us are evolving past what our even our spiritual limits have been giving us. So it's a very interesting dichotomy that we're in. We're literally at the crux of a cycle dropping to a major and a minor cycle collapsing and us birthing in something new. But what does that actually look like? Is that a physical split? I don't think so. I think it's more consciously. And quantum physics and the quantum mechanics to spirituality is starting to really take off, and more people are understanding frequency and vibration a lot better. So this just gives us a focal point of how far we have come in all 110, maybe let's say 120 years of the spiritual movement happening all the way back then to the now moment. It absolutely mind blows me. That mind blows me. That this is what they were talking about 110 years ago. It doesn't seem like it was that far, but it is. And we're now just getting it, now walking into it. And not to say that there's people that haven't already been through this process. It's just now the collective consciousness is now ready for this. As a collective, not just like the individual hermit over here and a light worker over there. Or maybe like a group of 100 people that have this awareness and been having it. No, like the collective. It's insane. The origin and destiny of the soul and the reason for its appearance on earth has, throughout the ages, been a theme of vital importance to humanity. But we can have no satisfying philosophy of life and the soul unless the doctrine of reincarnation is one of its fundamental postulates. But many persons refuse to investigate the doctrine of reincarnation because they have confused it in their minds with the mistaken exoteric Hindu doctrine of the transmigration of the soul through the bodies of lower animals. This doctrine of transmigration, arising through a misunderstanding of the law of reincarnation through ignorance of the details of its process, has quite naturally given to the Western world a great disgust for any doctrine even remotely suggesting that the human soul incarnates in lower animals, and so prevents the rational study of reincarnation. So much to say about that. As a matter of fact, transmigration is quite distinct from reincarnation, for reincarnation refers to the repeated incarnations of the same immortal spiritual entity or soul, while transmigration refers only to what becomes of the atoms of the various bodies occupied by the soul after they are thrown off from the body or after the soul has left them entirely through the gate of death. I'm a proponent of quantum panpsychism. I'm a proponent that we're all one, and but all one with all things, because we are electromagnetic conductors of energy. Energy is differentiated in different material forms: vibration, frequency, oscillation, spin. But consciously, I am very much the mountain, the blade of grass, the tree, the ant, the fly, the praying mantis, the cat, the dog, the animal, and then the human. In fractals of 0.0001% are a little bit of my consciousness in all these things, but that's all of you as well. We make up a whole totality of things. A lot of people don't believe in such things, but if God is omnipotent, omnipresent, therefore we are as well, because we are a part of that omnipotent and omnipresence. And then if you break things down quantumly and entanglement wise, there's some plausibility to that. So you got to look at the science that's presented. The understandings are still being mapped out right now, but I know Morgan Cat was definitely my familiar. She had a part of my essence in her. Freya does too. There's absolutely no way that isn't true. And you could say that for any one of the animals if you have them in your house. That there's always one or two that are so much like you and that are so much attached to your hip. There's reasons beyond the explanations the websites give you. There's a spiritual component to it. But I digress. Transmigration into lower animals cannot apply to the human soul, the three higher principles, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, as there is no animal form lower than the human which could contain a human soul. No form which has the organs, centers, and functions necessary for the incarnation and expression of a human soul. And since the lesser can never contain the greater, no animal form less developed than it below the human in evolution could possibly contain a human soul. So we may dismiss such a doctrine from our minds as basically and scientifically unsound. However, then, did such a misconception arise and become a doctrine of large but ignorant mass of people? I will say this. No, an animal cannot have a human soul. But we had to come from something. We had to go through different levels of density and experience. And some people traversed all the way from the beginnings of Earth all the way through becoming human. And I say the animals are going to have next cycle, they're going to become human. The third density animals that can self-identify will be human. That's just my perception. That's my take on it. You don't have to align with that. I believe we were once animals. And then at some point, Earth hit third density and we were given the option to come back as humans. But before that, we were also aliens. We are a lot of things, and we still are a lot of things, just in different parallel realities and densities that we don't yet perceive. The confusion probably began firstly by a misinterpretation of a certain passage in the Laws of Manu, which states that a Brahman killer enters the body of a dog, bear, ass, camel, goat, sheep, bird. And secondly, to lack of understanding of two very simple facts. The Brahmins have applied this passage to themselves, and by a play on words have allowed their followers to assume that passage alluded to those who killed a member of the Brahmin caste. But the word used is not Brahmin killer, but a Brahman, Bra, like Bra, Staten Island terms, killer. The word Brahmin refers to a member of the Brahmin caste, while the word Brahman is a connection refers to man's seventh or spiritual principle, the immortal monad. Therefore, he who kills or extinguishes in himself the light of Parabrahman severs his personal ego from the Atman, a seventh principle, becomes a Brahman killer. In other words, instead of aiding the union of the personal consciousness and the lower principles with the higher self or Father in heaven through prayer, spiritual aspiration, and a virtuous life, it is possible to cut the lower personality off from contact with the higher self and thus condemn every atom of his lower principles to disintegrate and become attracted to by the magnetic affinity created by his lower passions and is simulated by the bodies of corresponding lower animals. But it is not the soul or its emanations that are thus drawn into animal bodies, only the atoms of man's lower bodies and principles. The first of the two simple facts referred to above is that man tends to become and look like that of which he thinks most persistently. If he's a glutton and thinks chiefly of food and how much of it he can gorge and enjoy, such thoughts imprint themselves upon him, and he grows to look bestial and even like a dog, both in form and feature. If his major trait is cunning, he may take on a fox-like look. If vicarious or miserly, he may have the appearance of an eagle or a vulture. We are all familiar with such types of humanity, but more important, still informing the misconception as to transmigration is the second fact that on passing out of incarnation, our astral bodies take on still more definitely the impress of our characteristic thought forms. Therefore, after death, in extreme cases, the hog-like man may actually assume a still more hog-like appearance than while on earth. The cunning man, that of the fox, that of a vulture. Thus, once one who was sufficiently clairvoyant to see such animal-like astral forms might easily conclude, unless properly trained, that such persons had become or would inhabit corresponding animals in their next incarnation, which of course is not possible as we have seen above. A third fact leading to the confusion is that atoms of man's bodies, once they are released, either gradually during life or rapidly after death, and allowed to disintegrate by the withdrawal of the cohesive force of the animating soul, do return to dust from whence they came and are thus taken up and built into various forms of plant and animal life, and thus do transmigrate through many different non-human forms. Among the Egyptians, it was taught that a mummy, in spite of all the chemicals used in its preparation, nevertheless goes on throwing off invisible atoms, although not as rapidly as when the corpse is allowed to disintegrate normally, and that these atoms enter every form of vegetable and animal life, by which they may be taken up according to their affinity. The Egyptians taught that this process went on for approximately 3,000 years, more or less, at the end of which period the atoms, having transmigrated through innumerable substances and forms, were once more drawn together magnetically to help make up a body for the incarnation of the same soul, which they clothed in previous incarnation. A corruption of this doctrine was one of the reasons why the Egyptians mummified their dead, as they were allowed to believe that the soul would return to animate the same body if had left at death, which of course was not possible. Truth. This form of reincarnation was the belief of the masses, the exoteric doctrine for those too ignorant to understand the philosophy of the more subtle changes. But it was not the esoteric doctrine held by the priests of Isis, the true initiates whose real doctrines were even more veiled from the ignorant masses than those of the Chaldeans. In fact, there were three doctrines or sets of teachings in vogue at that time: that of the initiates, that of the priests of the outer temple, and that of the ignorant masses, who are allowed to worship certain animals, birds as divine, much as the members of certain Christian sects today are allowed to worship the cross, saints, pictures, bones, relics, all of which tends to arouse either disgust or pity in the minds of the more enlightened. But today, the researches of science are enabling anyone of ordinary intelligence to understand the truth back of the vulgar superstitions of the ignorant masses. We now know that no matter force or consciousness that has ever existed can cease to exist. Things which seem to have been destroyed only change their form, their essential constituents remaining and reappearing under other forms. A log of wood, when burned, disappears as a form, but every atom can be traced, weighed, measured, and chemically accounted for in the water vapor, carbon dioxide, and other gases, and volatile oils thrown off in the ashes, which result from the burning. All these atoms can be taken up by and built into another form of life, such as grass, vegetation, trees, and reappear as other logs, animal bodies. Ian, wasted smoke remains not traceless. In fact, the scientific law of the indestructibility of matter, force, and consciousness has always been one of the basic laws of occult philosophy, long before it was confirmed by science. Our planet itself is composed of the atoms and forces which once composed the previous chain of globes, which preceded the formation of the Earth chain, namely the Moon chain, while our bodies now contain particles and forces which we fail to spiritualize and redeem while on the Moon chain, as well as those used by us in former incarnations on this planet. The Egyptian doctrine, therefore, when properly understood, agrees both with the most recent experiments in the radioactivity of matter and the occult philosophy. It also agrees that the amount of creation in our own Bible. For if we properly understand that account, we will find it quite as esoteric as the Egyptian teachings and quite as thoroughly misunderstood by the ignorant mass of Christians as were the teachings of the priests of Isis by the ignorant masses in their day. The fundamentalists would have us believe that because the incarnation of a spiritual man in the body of flesh took place at the time of God, is described as breathing into the animal body the breath of life. There was no such thing as evolution as applied to man. This shows how little they understood their own Bible, for it especially points out that there were 5 great days or vast ages of creation and evolution preceding the creation of man, during which the successive lower forms of evolved and in the exact order claimed by science before men appeared at all. In Genesis 9, God said, "Let the waters be gathered together and let the dry land appear." Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind." And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle, creeping thing, and the beasts of the earth after his kind." And only in the sixth day of planetary evolution are we told that God formed animal man out of the dust of the ground. As a matter of fact, it required countless ages for the atoms of matter to be built up into more and more complex forms and associated with higher and higher manifestations of life. As they passed upward through the successive kingdoms, they were fit to be associated with the spiritual man by being incorporated in the body in which he was incarnate. For until they were so prepared by the development of their successive spiritually, he would not utilize them in his body. Although animals are composed of the same chemical elements as are the rocks and minerals, they cannot live on rocks and minerals or utilize them directly with certain expectations such as salt, until those materials have been built up into the colloid forms of lower kingdom, the vegetable, and thus be prepared for the nourishment. No more could the spiritual man use the atoms with the lower rates of vibration until they had passed through countless lower forms and thus been prepared for his assimilation and use. While the animals are also animated by the universal one life force like man, they do not have the capacity of assimilating the higher octaves of spiritual vibrations, for their atoms are many octaves of vibration below those which animate man. Unless man delicately lowers his vibrations to those of the animal kingdom, to his low desires, thoughts, and acts. Thus, Genesis, by confirming both modern science and occult philosophy, proves itself to be one of the most esoteric and occult books ever given to man. In fact, it is but a condensed story of the gathering together of the materials of the former chain of globes and their bombardment by the life atoms until the life force evolved from those materials, first the simple and then the more and more advanced forms, until finally there were evolved human forms or coats of skin, into which it was possible for the spiritual man of Genesis 27 to incarnate here on earth. When the Lord God breathed the breath of life into the nostrils of the animal man, he then became a living soul, because only then had the spiritual man incarnated in him. It is this animal body and not the immortal soul that is referred to in the words, "Dust thou art, unto dust shalt thou return." I'm going to put a little pause here. There are videos out there that on scientific equipment, I don't know if it's a CAT scan or an MRI, but the moment of insemination and a sperm hitting the egg, there is a spark of light. The spark of God. Just to take that little beep in there. It is through incarnation in such evolved human bodies and not in the lower animals, composed of the atoms and forces we had not finished spiritualizing either on the moon chain or on this earth, that we must reassume and finally complete the process until through the unfolding and use of greater spiritual powers, we ultimately build up a completely spiritualized body in which we can dwell on any plane without having to die and leave the body behind as dust. The Egyptian doctrine of life atoms emanating from a mummy from 3,000 years, therefore, has a certain scientific basis. For we know that even certain minerals, the radium group, require nearly 3,000 years of continuous emanation before they lose more than half their weight, approximately the same time given by the Egyptians as elapsing between incarnations. According to the laws of chemical affinity, certain atoms combine only with atoms with which they have more or less affinity. If a substance contains atoms held loosely within it by, sorry, by slightly affinity, geez Louise, by slight affinity and other atoms having greater affinity are brought near, the loosely held atoms will leave the first substance and rush to the one with the greater affinity. Often this process is so rapid and powerful as to cause disintegration of what are apparently the most solid substances, as witnessed in the action of acids upon steel or granite, or the instant disintegrations of gunpowder which cause explosions. And if chemical affinity is sufficient to produce these tremendous results with the hardest substances, surely magnetic and spiritual affinity are amply sufficient to draw together the atoms which are strongly affinitized to a certain soul. For it is this occult doctrine that as the soul descends into incarnation, it awakens the permanent atoms on each plane, and through this gradually draws itself many of the atoms which belong to its past lives. This process is not completed at once, but goes on throughout each life as former atoms are released from other forms and made available for us. What a spin. I like this. The next chapter will be 10, LB Part 2. There's a lot there to unpack. Holy moly. But yes, amazing. That's all I have to say. I love them. And I'm sure their consciousness is coming straight through. Keep an open mind. But what they're bringing forth is a truth that we don't seem to look at anymore. And they're bringing a very interesting process to our becoming, physically at least. So, sending each and every one of you love, light, compassion, grace, shielding, and protective energy. Please go within, be the shoulder, be the lighthouse, see your truths, light that path forward. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Got a lot of people that watch, but not many likes. I don't understand why. Just do me a favor. It would be nice. Grows the channel. It helps me out. Thank you for those who do. I will be live tomorrow for Craft and Sip. I don't know what I'm crafting just yet, but it will be good. Yeah, we'll figure it out as I close up shop down here. So until the next one, guys, have a blessed and beautiful night wherever you are in the world. Bye for now.